In your previous lecture, we started talking about transducer elements. We define transducer elements as those devices which receives strain or displacement as input and gives us electrical output. In general, transducer elements are those devices which converts the form of the signal to a more convenient form. However, we are interested in those electromechanical transducers which gives us electrical output and receives displacement or strain as input. We said that we will discuss one pneumatic transducer, namely flapper nozzle systems, and various electromechanical transducers such as LVDT or linear variable differential transformer, strain gauge, piezoelectric transducer, and capacitive type transducer. We started our discussion on flapper nozzle systems, so let's continue with flapper nozzle system. Flapper nozzle system is the basis of all pneumatic transmitters. It consists of a fixed flow restriction, which is an orifice, and a variable restrictor in the form of a nozzle and flapper. Air at a fixed pressure, say Ps, flows through the nozzle past this restriction given by orifice. Due to the presence of the flapper, there will be a back pressure that will alter the output pressure or signal pressure. Altering the gap between nozzle and flapper alters the resistance to airflow and hence the output pressure. Increase in the gap between nozzle and the flapper will lower the resistance and fall in output pressure. Therefore, the output pressure or signal pressure represented here by P0 can be calibrated in terms of the gap that exists between flapper and the nozzle, which is displacement. Let's now try to find out approximate static sensitivity for flapper nozzle system. Let's assume flow through the restrictions incompressible. So, we assume flow through orifice and flow through nozzle incompressible. Let the orifice dia be represented by DO and the nozzle dia be represented by DN. We represent fluid density by rho and we assume that the discharge coefficient for orifice and the discharge coefficient for nozzle are same. So, now flow through the orifice can be represented by this equation. So, flow through orifice Q1 is equal to discharge coefficient multiplied by pi d0 to the power 4 divided by 4 into square root of 2 into rho into Ps minus Po, where Ps is the supply pressure and Po is the signal pressure. Similarly, the flow through nozzle can be represented by this equation, which is Q2 equal to Cd multiplied by pi times Dn times Xi into square root of 2 into rho into Po minus P ambient, where Cd is discharge coefficient, Dn is the diameter of the nozzle, Xi is the gap between the nozzle and the flapper, rho is the fluid density, Po is the signal pressure, and P ambient equal to ambient pressure. Now, if you assume flow continuity, the flow through orifice should be equal to flow through nozzle. If we assume P ambient equal to 0 gauge pressure, then we can equate, after equating Q1 equal to Q2 and after some rearrangement, we can write P0 by Ps as this equation. So, we assume flow continuity and P ambient equal to 0 gauge pressure. So, we equate Q1 equal to Q2 with P ambient equal to 0. Then we do some rearrangement and can write P0 by Ps equal to 1 by 1 plus 16 into dn square into xi square divided by do to the power 4. Now, PO is the signal pressure and PS is the supply pressure. So, P0 by PS can also be taken as normalized signal pressure or output pressure. It is now clearly seen that the sensitivity, which can be represented as ddxi of this, varies with xi. So, the displacement sensitivity of the flapper nozzle system, which can be found out from this equation as ddxi of this part of the equation, and it can be seen that sensitivity has a maximum at xi equal to 0.14 into do square by dn. When xi is sufficiently large, P0 by Ps becomes almost constant. So, for sufficiently large value of xi or sufficiently large displacement, P0 by Ps, which is normalized output pressure, becomes almost constant, or in other words tend to saturate. However, P0 by Ps is linear between 0.15 to 0.75. For supply pressure Ps equal to 20 psi, this corresponds to 3 to 15 psi, and this is the limits of industrial control pressure. So, this is the plot one of tens when one plots output pressure or signal pressure versus the gap between the nozzle and the flapper. It can be seen that for large value of gap or the displacement, this part of the graph tend to saturate. So, it will become almost constant, but it has a linear part, which is this part, and it is approximately linear in the range of 3 to 15 psi. Flapper nozzle system has an important application in converting the current signal to pressure signal. A converter that converts current signal to pressure signal finds important application in process control system. We can use a flapper nozzle system to make such a device, which will receive electrical signal and gives us pressure signal as output. We call them current to pressure converter or I/P converter. This works as follows. So, we have a flow restriction here. This is supply air 20 psi. This is the nozzle. And this is flapper. This is the pivot. This is the signal pressure or output pressure. This is a spring. Frequently, we may be interested in converting a current signal to a pressure signal. IP converter gives a linear way of translating 4 to 20 milliampere current to 3 to 15 psi pressure signal. If I send 4 to 20 milliampere current through this coil, a force will be produced that will pull down the flapper. As it pulls down the flapper, the gap between the flapper and the nozzle changes, so the signal pressure accordingly changes. High current will produce high pressure. So, adjustment of the spring can be made such that I can calibrate this system so that 4 milliampere corresponds to 3 psi pressure and 20 milliampere corresponds to 15 psi pressure. So, I can convert a current signal between 4 to 20 milliampere to a pressure signal between 3 to 15 psi. So, its working principle is very simple. It is essentially a flapper nozzle system Here we are passing a current through this coil which produces a force which pulls down the flapper. As it pulls down, the gap between the nozzle and the flapper changes, which will cause a change in the signal pressure. Adjustment of the spring can be made so that we can calibrate the instrument such that when I am passing 4 milliampere current through this coil, the signal pressure will be 3 psi, and when I am passing 20 milliampere current, the signal pressure will be 15 psi. So, 4 to 20 milliampere current signal can be converted to a 3 to 15 psi pressure signal. Let us now talk about another electrical transducer, and we talk about linear variable differential transformer, commonly known as LVDT. LVDT is an electromechanical device that produces electrical output proportional to displacement of a movable core. So, it is a displacement transducer. It is the most commonly used variable inductance transducer in industry. So, it is an inductance type transducer or variable inductance type transducer. LVDT looks like this, and if you look at inside of this, we see that there is a soft iron core or ferromagnetic core, and there is a primary coil represented by A here, and there are two identical secondary coils. So, this soft iron core provides magnetic coupling between a single primary coil and two identical secondary coils. These two identical secondary coils are connected in series opposition. So, when the cord slides through the transformer, certain portion of the coils are affected, and this induces a unique voltage. This core is physically connected to the object whose displacement is to be measured. So, as the object moves, the core also slides through the transformer. So, certain portion of the secondary coils are affected, which will induce a unique voltage, and this voltage will be taken as a direct measure of the displacement. So, this is the primary coil, and these are two identical secondary coils which are connected in series opposition. That these two secondary coils are connected in series opposition is clear from this circuit diagram. Usually, the core is made of nickel iron alloy, ferrite. Primary coil is excited by a sinusoidal voltage of amplitude 1 volt to 15 volts and frequency 50 hertz to 20 kilohertz. The whole sensor is enclosed and shielded so that no field extends outside it and hence cannot be influenced by outside fields. Look at these two circuit diagrams. In one case, the core is centrally located. When it is centrally located, equal parts of these two secondary coils are affected. When the core is pushed up, only this secondary coil is affected, but the other secondary coil is not. The core will move up or come down as the object changes position, because this core is physically connected to the object. So, different amount of voltage will be induced in these two coils, and thus the output voltage will change as the position of the core changes. LVDT is a highly sensitive instrument or highly sensitive transducer. The sensitivity of typical LVDTs is in the range of 1 to 5 volt per centimeter, and it can measure a displacement as low as plus minus 0.002 centimeter and can measure up to several centimeters. Let us now consider the circuit diagram of the LVDT again. So, this is the primary coil and these are two secondary coils. This is the iron core which is connected physically to the object whose displacement I want to measure. So, this core moves like this or this. For the time being, let us assume that the two secondary coils are not connected in series opposition. Since these two secondary coils are identical in all respect, equal amount of voltage will be induced in both the coils. So, if I excite the primary coil by this signal, I may get these signals for the secondary coils. Now, if they are connected in series opposition, since the magnitudes are equal and since they are connected in series opposition, the output voltage will be 0, as can be seen from here. When the core is central, the induced voltage in the secondary coils are equal in magnitude, but the output voltage is 0 as they are connected in series opposition. As the core moves up or down, the induced voltage of one secondary coil increases while that of other decreases. The output voltage is proportional to the displacement of the core. Now, if you look at these plots, when the core is centrally located, output voltage is 0, because equal amount of voltages are induced in both the secondary coils, and since secondary coils are connected in series opposition, the output voltage is 0. So, if I excite the primary coil by say this signal, I will get 0 voltage as output when the core is centrally located, or we say core at null. If the core moves up or comes down, I will have non-zero voltage as output, because as the core moves up or comes down, the induced voltage of one secondary coil increases while that of other decreases. So, when the core is above null position, which is shown by this figure, I will get output signal like this. While core is below null, so when this core is pushed down, I will get output voltage as this. Output voltage on either side of null position is 180 degree out of phase. As you can see, when you plot the output voltage versus the displacement of the core. So, as if I start from here, I push the core down, it takes centrally located position, I push it further, it goes below null. So, the output voltage will undergo a 180 degree phase shift. If you look at this figure and these three figures, we understand that the output voltage will undergo a 180 degree phase shift. We can also have rotary motion type LVDT, which is schematically represented by this. We have a primary coil, we have two secondary coils, and this is connected to the object whose rotary motion I have to measure. So, as it rotates like this, different portions of these two secondary coils are connected. So, output voltage changes accordingly. There are several advantages associated with LVDT. LVDT is a very sensitive transducer. Its sensitivity is in the range of 1 to 5 volt per centimeter. Over a range of motion, the output is linear. You can see here, over a range of motion, the output is linear. So, you have a linear range. It offers essentially frictionless measurement. It has very long mechanical life. It has very high resolution. It also has good null repeatability. Let us now talk about strain gauge, which is another electrical transducer which receives strain as input and gives us electrical signal as output. Let us start with some basic definitions that you are already familiar with. When you apply force to a solid at rest, it will be mechanically deformed to a certain extent. If the force is tensile in nature, the length of the solid will increase. If the force is compressive, the length of the solid will decrease. The longitudinal strain or axial strain is defined as change in length divided by original length. So, we represent axial strain or the longitudinal strain as delta L divided by L. Longitudinal stress is defined as force divided by areas. So, force F applied on area A. Force divided by area is longitudinal stress. The stress strain relationship within elastic limit is given by Hooke's law, which says Young's modulus E equal to stress divided by strain. Strain is unitless because it is ratio of two lengths. So, if stress is in kg per meter square, Young's modulus will also be in kg per meter square. When a body of length is elongated, its transverse or perpendicular dimension will contract. We call this lateral strain, which can be represented as delta D divided by D, where delta D is the change in diameter and D is the original diameter. Poisson's ratio says Poisson ratio is the ratio of lateral strain to longitudinal strain. So, Poisson ratio nu is epsilon T by epsilon A is the ratio of transverse strain or lateral strain to longitudinal strain. We write nu equal to minus epsilon T by epsilon A, where epsilon T is the transverse strain and epsilon A is axial strain. Poisson's ratio lies between 0 and 0.5 and mostly it is 0.3. Strain measurement is essentially measurement of very small displacement. By very small, we mean as small as 1 micrometer. There are various methods for measurement of strain. There are mechanical methods, electrical methods as well as optical methods. Mechanical methods use levers and gears to measure change in length after magnification. For example, early days we used extensometer to magnify strain. Extensometer uses many levers to magnify strain so that it becomes readable. Electrical methods uses the properties such as change in resistance or inductance or capacitance to measure strain. Optical methods uses interference, diffraction and scattering of light waves. The most commonly used method is electrical method that uses change in resistance of a resistor when it is strained. Using this principle, we have resistive strain gauges transducer. For a wire of cross sectional area A, resistivity rho and length L, the resistance is given by the familiar equation R equal to rho into L divided by A. This equation holds good for many common metals and non-metals at room temperature when subjected to direct or low frequency current. When the wire is stretched, the cross sectional area A is reduced, which causes the total wear resistance to increase. So, when the wear is stretched, we increase the length, reduce the area, and the resistance thus increases. In addition, since the lattice structure is altered by the strain, the resistivity of the material may also change, and this in general causes the resistance to increase further. To provide a means of comparing performance of various gauges, let us define something called gauge factor or strain sensitivity. The gauge factor or strain sensitivity can be defined as delta R by R over delta L by L. So, this is the fractional change in resistance, which is delta R by R, by axial strain or longitudinal strain, which is fractional change in length, delta L by L. So, we define gauge factor as fractional change in resistance divided by fractional change in length. In other words, fractional change in resistance divided by axial or longitudinal strain. Higher gauge factors are generally more desirable. The higher the gauge factor, the higher the resolution of the strain gauge. So, you have a functional relationship between resistance and resistivity, length and area. So, we can find out change in resistance delta R as del R del L times delta L plus del R del A times delta A plus del R del rho times del rho, delta rho. Now, these partial derivatives can be found out from the equation R equal to rho into L divided by A. So, if I find out these partial derivatives, we can write delta R as rho by A into delta L minus rho L by A square into delta A plus rho by L by A into delta rho. If I now divide this equation throughout by resistance R, we will have delta R by R, which is fractional change in resistance, as delta L by L minus delta A by A plus delta rho by rho. So, the first term delta L by L is fractional change in length. The second term is fractional change in area, and the third term is fractional change in resistivity. If we assume the relationship of area with diameter as A equal to some constant C into d square, then you can write delta A as 2 into C into d delta d. So, then it becomes possible for us to find out delta A by A, and we will see that delta A by A is 2 C d delta d divided by C d square. A is C d square, which is 2 delta d by d, and delta d by d is nothing but lateral strain or transverse strain epsilon t. So, delta A by A becomes 2 epsilon t. So, the fractional change in resistance delta R by R can be written as epsilon A minus 2 into epsilon t plus delta rho by rho. So, this is axial strain minus twice lateral strain plus delta rho by rho. So, the gauge factor, which is delta R by R divided by delta L by L, can now be found out as epsilon A minus 2 epsilon t plus delta rho by rho divided by axial strain, which will become 1 plus 2 nu, where nu is the Poisson ratio epsilon t by epsilon a equal to minus nu plus delta rho by rho epsilon a, which is axial strain. Now, this term, which is delta rho by rho divided by epsilon a, which is same as delta rho by rho divided by delta L by L, is constant for a material and is directly proportional to modulus of elasticity. And the proportionality constant is known as Bridgman coefficient. So, the gauge factor is finally defined as F equal to 1 plus 2 nu plus epsilon E. I repeat, the gauge factor is finally found out to be as F equal to 1 plus 2 nu plus psi, which is Bridgman coefficient, times E, which is modulus of elasticity. If I look at gauge factor of some of the materials that are used for strain gauge, we see that advanced, which has composition copper 55% and nickel 45%, has a gauge factor between 2 to 2.2. Similarly, nichrome, which is an alloy of nickel and chromium with nickel 80% and chromium 20%, has gauge factor of 2.2 to 2.5. Pure platinum has a higher gauge factor, about 4.8. Semiconductor materials are also used for construction of strain gauges, and semiconductor type strain gauges have extremely high gauge factor of the order of 100 to 200. So, how do I measure strain with help of a strain gauge? Strain gauge is usually in the form of a wire filament. It can be of various types like bonded type, unbonded type or semiconductor type. Let us consider this as strain gauge. So, this consists of a resistance wire, let us say. The wire filament is attached to a structure which is under strain, and the resistance in the strained wire is measured by the Wheatstone bridge principle. So, we take the wire filament, which is the strain gauge, attached to the structure whose strain I want to measure. Before the strain gauge is under any strain, we balance the bridge. Now, the strain gauge is strained, so there will be change in resistance and there will be an unbalanced current in the Wheatstone bridge, and the unbalanced current will be taken as the direct measure of the strain. This is a schematic representation of unbonded strain gauge. It consists of a set of preloaded resistance wires which is stretched between two frames. One is movable and the other is fixed. So, a set of preloaded resistance wire is stretched between two frames. One is movable and the other is fixed. Typically, the wire we use is of 25 millimeter length and 25 micrometer diameter. The movable base is connected to the object. So, this receives the input motion or force. So, this unbonded wires will now be stretched. That will cause a change in resistance of the wires, and change in resistance will cause Wheatstone bridge unbalance. The output voltage is proportional to input displacement. A very small motion up to 50 micrometer and very small force can be measured. These are schematics of bonded strain gauge. It can be of wire type or it can be of foil type. Bonded strain gauges are directly bonded to the surface of the specimen being tested with a thin layer of adhesive cement. They use paper or bakelite as backing material. So, they use paper or bakelite as backing material. It should be BACKING. The bonded strain gauges are useful for measurement of strain, force, torque, pressure, vibrations, etc. They are very sensitive and can measure strains as low as 10 to the power minus 7. So, this is the structure that is undergoing strain, and this is the foil which is bonded on the surface of the structure undergoing strain with adhesive cement. These are terminal wires which is connected to the one arm of the Wheatstone bridge. Bonded strain gauges are also made of semiconductor material, usually silicon doped with boron gives us P type semiconductor strain gauge, and silicon doped with arsenic gives us N type semiconductor strain gauge. High gauge factor and small gauge length are its advantages. However, high temperature sensitivity and nonlinearity are disadvantages. This figure again schematically represents various bonded strain gauges. So, these are the gauge wires, this is backing and this is cemented with this, and these leads are connected to the one arm of the Wheatstone bridge. Now, the resistance of a wire can also change with change in temperature. So, if there is any change in the ambient temperature, that will also try to change the resistance of the strain gauge. So, it is not only the strain that will try to change the resistance of the strain gauge, but also the temperature will also try to change the resistance of the strain gauge. So, we need to compensate for the changes in temperature. So, this is the circuit diagram we previously discussed, which does not have any temperature compensation. So, one arm of the Wheatstone bridge has the strain gauge. To have a temperature compensation, we take two identical strain gauges connected to two arms of the Wheatstone bridge. One strain gauge is stressed. So, this is attached to the specimen whose strain we are going to measure, and other one is not strained. So, this is unstressed. Now, the effect of temperature will be same in both the strain gauges. So, changes in resistance of the strain gauges by temperature alone will be same in both the same gauges, but the strain gauge that is strained or stressed will have additional change in resistance which comes from the strain. So, the changes in resistance due to temperature change will be nullified by the change in resistance of this strain gauge caused by temperature, which is not strained. So, this way, by putting two identical strain gauge, but using only one to connect to the specimen whose strain I want to measure, I can compensate for the changes in temperature. Strain gauges are used to measure displacement, force, load, pressure, torque, weight. Strain gauges may be bonded to cantilever springs to measure the force of bending. Strain gauge elements are also used in the design of pressure transmitters using a bellows type or diaphragm type pressure sensor. Semiconductor type strain gauge has very high gauge factor. Let us now briefly talk about capacitive type transducers. We are familiar with this equation for capacitance, which relates capacitance to area of plates, distance between two plates, and the dielectric constant or relative permittivity. So, if we take two plates which are separated by distance d and has area A, the capacitance in picofarad will be 1 by 3.6 pi into epsilon, which is dielectric constant, into A by d, where A is area of plates in centimeter square, d distance between plates in centimeter. Now, we can make a capacitive transducer by changing area or distance or dielectric medium. Any change in area, distance or dielectric will cause a change in the capacitance. For example, if these two plates moves in these directions, the gap between these two changes. So, there will be change in capacitance. If one plate is fixed, another changes, the area between the two plates are changing. So, there will be capacitance change. So, I can have variable area capacitance transducer or variable distance capacitance transducer. Suppose one plate is fixed while the other is moved by the moving object. So, the position of the moving object causes a change in the capacitance C. Capacitance is inversely proportional to the motion as long as the distances sensed are small. Finally, let us briefly talk about piezoelectric transducer. When a crystalline material like quartz is distorted, an electric charge is produced. Application of a force P causes deformation Xi, producing a charge Q, and you can write Q equal to K into Xi, where K is the charge sensitivity constant. The crystal now behaves like a capacitor carrying a charge across it. So, voltage across crystal E0 will be Q by C and Q is Kxi. So, we can write E0 equal to Kxi by C, which can be K by C can be considered as another constant K. So, E0 equal to K into C. So, the voltage that is produced is proportional to the charge. Naturally occurring highly polar crystals like quartz, Rochelle salt, ammonium dihydrogen phosphate, or synthesized material like barium titanate, ceramic, lead zirconate titanate are used for piezoelectric transducers. Piezoelectric senses have advantages like it is of low cost, small size, high sensitivity and high mechanical stiffness, broad frequency range, good linearity and repeatability. However, it has some disadvantages as well. It has high impedance, low power and drift with temperature and pressure. So, with this we will end our discussion on transducer elements.